Welcome to the What's Appening Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Murphy. This season, we're interviewing GPT creators. What's Appening is brought to you by 3 Advance. It's a startup development team that doesn't just prompt LLMs, we program them. And today, our very special guest is Noble Ackerson. Noble is an experienced product manager. He's a technologist, an entrepreneur, an educator. For as long as I've known Noble, he's been on the cutting edge of tech and innovation. Noble, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here and great to sync up with you again.
And Noble, the reason why we're chatting is, well, it goes back to when we first met. I think it was like pre-DC startup or DC sports tech meetup group. I think you spoke and it was all about Google Glass when I first saw you anyway. And you were always on the bleeding edge of tech. And I reached out to you this weekend. I'm like, I bet Noble's been playing with GPTs. He's doing far more complicated things. I'm sure he's into GPTs. But tell me about the GPT. Tell me how you get any kind of interest at all in that sort of sliver of this AI journey, GPTs.
So I guess intellectual curiosity is the whole thing. It started with plugins, right? For me, just sort of exploring what the capabilities were, digging into the OpenAI API, understanding what a function call was, how to basically these systems are text to text or string to string, right? So what I was curious about, which got me into plugins and then eventually GPTs, was how to sort of just harness this blob of text into something that was not just a dump of text, but basically without fine tuning per se, just to basically bring it some more structure. Because fine tuning is a way to achieve that, but I don't have time for that. I'm not an ML engineer, right?
So what was your first foray into the plugins? Were you I know you're all into automations. I'm sure you use Zapier and IFTTT and all those kind of things. Is that where it's kicked off, or tell me a little bit more about that?
No. So for me, for plugins, it was just a need for me to sort of solve my own problem. I don't know. When we met, I was probably working on my startup at the time. I had the fitness startup called LinksFit, which we launched on Google Glass, as you mentioned. And whenever a new wave of technology comes in, I basically use that concept as a bellwether for whether my concept could live another day. So I don't know whether you are aware, you remember physical web, basically these little sensors that allowed you to sort of detect stuff and sort of pass it through. That was a wave that I tried out with the fitness concept, being able to sort of walk to a gym close by to a bench press or something like that, and being able to sort of be given on my phone a couple workouts. And so my plugin was certainly very simple, using natural language to sort of guide and structure the types of workouts in a format that made sense. I didn't want something too nested. I wanted a circuit, the output to be a circuit, well, basically a program, a circuit, a bunch of workouts for that circuit, and individual, obviously the individual atomic workouts themselves. Cool. And I played around with it. Again, there was nothing I was trying to sell. It was just a personal thing to do. That worked well enough for me to get my head around what OpenAI is doing. Of course, there were other solutions, so I was playing around with other ways to do that. But if you're probably definitely aware, other large language models like, what Google was doing with Gemini, what Meta was doing with Llama, almost, and even Hugging Face generally sort of coalesced around the OpenAI way to do, I guess, plugins at the time, and sort of followed in with function calls. Specifically, the way I was doing my function calls were sort of similar universally. So I was able to, with a couple lines of code, just sort of traverse one LLM to another and just feed my intellectual itch of sorts. GPT specifically, for that, where I am today is I'm using that to coach my mentees, right? My typical mentee is someone in college, right out of college, earlier in their career, looking for a job or looking to upskill or looking to sort of grow in their current role in the field of product management.
Awesome.
Or technical product management, or even machine learning, engineering, or data science, right? And so they're business analysts that sort of, want to move from business analysis to, say, data science, right? So what we did with their help, so I met with my cousin, actually, who was one of those, and created the first GPT for him. It was a very simple GPT. It was private. I don't have thousands of users for that one. But for my cousin, what I did was allow them to upload their knowledge, their resume, bio, case studies that they've done, examples of structured star-based case studies that they've done, anything about them. And I thought, and it worked really well for them. And I thought I should do this for myself as well. Not that I'm looking, but it'd be good to sort of, if I see a really cool job, there are these services called ATSs, so automated tracking systems or talent management systems. And they have these rudimentary algorithms that weed out candidates. And so my version 0.2, I guess, was eventually being able to score these outputs from, say, for example, I upload a job description. It knows my resume. It knows enough about me.
Yeah.
And it would just basically do a score against that. So searchability is one metric. I should probably have it up. Another metric is, how close does your resume match with the job descriptions? And then not only that, it would do some lowercase r reasoning through that in order to sort of recommend what you should do to either upskill yourself or improve your resume if you have those skills.
Yeah.
So that was point 2. And then later we started getting a little fancy with back to the function calls and being able to tap into APIs, that kind of stuff in order to, make this thing real.
So ultimately, because it's called the version of the GPT right now, it's called My Career Navigator. So it's matching you and trying to distinguish and figure out whether you're a good match with a certain job application, and then presumably our job position. Presumably, then you could build on it and start finding potential matches that are out there, or like you say, how to figure out how you upskill yourself to be more hireable for that position.
Correct. Far too often, we focus on, at least my mentees, I probably, if I was in the market, I'd probably be doing the same mistake, is there's an overemphasis on the resume itself and, following the best practices and on how to highlight it.
Yeah.
But what is difficult to do is to tailor your resume to the actual job description and what the hiring manager needs to see. Yeah. Far too often, candidates have the qualifications, but it is very, very difficult to represent, sometimes for some people, to represent what they do, just to market themselves in words, in a format. There's so many constraints to getting it right. And so this is I feel a GPT is an optimal use case for augmenting that process that would be laborious, perhaps repetitive, for every single job. And in this market, for another GPT that we're working on is just basically tracking how many of these you're doing. That's still under progress.
Well, I can speak, but on the other side of things, I can speak very clearly to this, because we're hiring a couple of product managers right now, and it's, first of all, the job reports and how the market looks, the economy looks, is very different from what I'm seeing. There are a lot of very qualified people and a lot of resumes that come in that, like you say, that they look similar. They check a lot of the boxes, but what's the catch? Like it's, and I think there's a huge need to be able to sell yourself better And especially in today's market, and then we can get into this in a little bit as well. It's like, well, where the market's going, it's going to get even more important to be able to, find your own value prop and be able to respond in a tailored way that promotes your own individualism in the face of so much competition.
I completely agree. And you just made me think of perhaps something controversial. So I don't know if this is controversial or not. As a hiring manager, when I get resumes, I can almost immediately see resumes that come from a GPT.
Yes.
Or from a large language model.
Yes.
Right? Even resumes often that aren't just sort of just copy and paste from the output of the GPT, certain ways that the system structures its outputs based on how it was fine-tuned or went through its own RLHF or whatever process. Those of us who use these tools can see those patterns very easily. And sometimes it's not one-to-one. I mean, if I see, for this project, I delved into the world of, you can definitely tell that. And I think that's what, to your point, makes hiring even more challenging, because it's almost like AIs, screening AIs, talking to AIs and deciding which slips through. And I don't know I don't have the data to look at the false positive rates for that, to sort of see if, after a candidate slips through after a well-written prompt to write a resume, whether, what their success rate is with the actual interview process, which again, you've got your output, which is a resume, and your outcome, landing a job. The emphasis should not be on the output per se. It's a healthy balance of the inputs, the work that you did to craft that resume, which is why we're doing the Career Navigator GPT, the polish and structure of that to fit the job, which is different based on industry or based on what you're looking for, job over job. And of course, the outcome, are you adequately equipped to interview for this job? So my Career Navigator GPT is trying to be a little bit perhaps too ambitious. And so we may break it up, given how it works. Whereas, yes, you uploaded your resume, it scored it for you, right? You got your various scores and perhaps you then need to sort of have the system remember this context for this specific company in order to spit out certain things that you should ask the screener or be prepared to answer for that role. And it's, again, in my opinion, a perfect candidate to augment that job or that career guidance process.
So what I'm looking at, and one of the reasons why I have this podcast to begin with, Noble, is to kind of look at GPTs and figure out what of these GPTs are ultimately potentially products. 3Advance is what we do, right? We build mobile apps, we build digital products, and we see a huge, and I've said this many times already, it's a playground for entrepreneurs. So there are potentially validated products or validation of products happening in the GPT store. And I'm curious, do you see your GPT as ever becoming a product, or it maybe just, is it more of maybe an experiment and an enlightening for you to understand maybe the process underneath the surface that your GPT is addressing?
It's certainly not a product, in my view. Lots of GPTs, depending on how much traction they get, you then sort of evaluate the viability and perhaps even the feasibility of the tool as a product. This, I think, is a feature for an existing product, Job Scan or one of those, LinkedIn or whatever. I believe LinkedIn recently, with their AI implementations, you see little pockets of features dropping in. And I believe I saw a feature in there. You click on a job that it's advertised for you or you see in your feed, in the jobs feed. And before you click on it, right underneath the primary action button or the call to action to apply, there is am I a good fit?
Yes.
And what it does when you click that is to provide you, essentially the output of the My Career Navigator GPT that we created, that I created a few last year, which is great. It validates that there's a need there, at least for me. The problem is it a standalone feature? When I think, a standalone product. When I start thinking standalone product, to answer that question right, do I want to understand the market? What other tools are doing that in standalone? Far too often, and Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, has mentioned this as well. Developers rush, or even enthusiasts rush to try to bridge a gap between a feature that is getting a lot of traction to a product. And as Sam Altman says, we'll eat your lunch. At least that's what he said. I think if you're a GPT wrapper, as they call it, it's not a bad thing, but we just need to understand, product fundamentals in order to sort of classify some of these tools as a product. But for me, the Career Navigator is not a product.
Yeah.
It's either augmentative to something else that you're using, but not a product.
A few things I pick up on there. First thing is are you actually commending LinkedIn for doing something impressive with their product and AI strategy? I feel like we all see those AI prompts at the bottom of every post at the moment. That's mind-blowingly confusing. I'm glad they're actually using it for some good use.
That's the problem with features, right? Now they have AI feature bloat.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
One that really, I don't know, I can tell who uses this tool and who doesn't, right? There's you write a couple sentences or something and you can just click a button to have it generate text, the full context of what you're trying to say. It never gets it right. Yeah. And those who don't really take the time to try to read, just read the outputs of these things, publish and, hurt their company's brand or whatever. But I think there's a bit of feature bloat. That does not detract, in my opinion, from features that they do have that are helpful.
Yeah.
There are parts of, LinkedIn. There's some posts that, perhaps don't need context. But I feel, at least in my feed, that I think to your point, that it's just those buttons everywhere and they just go on forever. And it's a bit annoying. But in where I'm looking to solve a specific problem, not passively consuming content, but looking to actually create. So in the case of jobs, actually take an action on a thing, anything that can augment my process to increase my chances of insert goal.
Yes.
I think is powerful.
Yeah.
Right. A powerful use.
When the GPT store opened up, Noble, what I found it curious, suddenly there was 1 million, 2 million GPTs. And some people are saying, oh, this is like the App Store. I don't think it's like the App Store, though it's still a possibility. OpenAI swallow up everything. I go from day to day of thinking OpenAI will swallow up everything to they're going to be almost irrelevant because it's going to democratically LLMs everywhere and small models and everything else. So I jump in and out of where I feel about that. But I had this feeling about the GPT store that it was like millions and millions of features, millions of superpowered API endpoints potentially. So at some point they might switch it. So suddenly you have an API is an API store for exactly what you're saying. It's like, hey, resume suitability for a candidate.
Right.
Matching the person's resume with the job posting, but which could be integrated anywhere. Like we have, and you probably know, we have a mentor-mentee app that we're pushing right now that we developed just recently. And what I'm looking right now at is exactly like this. Like how can we offer value add to an app that's, as you know this, it's very difficult to keep people engaged. The core benefit is there, but people won't stick around. So what other kind of features can be plugged in that might, increase the value and the interactions of the user, so it thrives. And I think your GPT specifically would be a great interaction within that environment. I
think so too. Last year I'd hired, I think 2-3 years ago, I'd hired a data scientist, a very seasoned data scientist at one of the clients that I work for. And, their notion of a product or their notion of machine learning, this is narrow AI in this context, was to do a thing and then build a dashboard to show the thing or to show the notebook for the thing. And the question that was asked of me when I pushed back was, I don't even know what you do, Noble. Like, what do you do? I'm doing this thing. And so I had to sort of get my little violin and stand on top of the box and say, well, I'm a product manager. This is what we do. It's obvious that you would, build a dashboard to show time series analysis. But it is important to note that the customer does not want to sort of predict the next, for the next couple months in that context. This is I'm just making an example.
Yes.
But what may be useful is to use a prediction to recommend, and that is a feature within an existing product, an endpoint that an existing product can consume. To your exact point, and that just did not compute, right? And so, I think, and I'm biased because I'm full stack product guy, right? So I think we need to pair better with the scientists and the engineers, just to, one, help distinguish what's important versus what's obvious. Two, just because we can, does it mean we should? And if we should, understanding what we're trying to do. Yes. Build fast, get the thing out there and publish it on this OpenAI app store, see whether it actually meets a need. And that is baseline validation, right? We know this. And once you get that validation, even if it's 100 users or 1,000, you get that percentage that aren't just users, are minions. They just want to do your bidding by the thing. Why isn't this tied into my insert product here?
Totally.
If that's the case. Or why isn't this a product so I can buy it?
Yeah.
That's where you get into monetization. And I've been following some of your podcasts and a lot of conversations about that, and very fascinated about that.
Yeah. It's like the idea of the most lovable product rather than MVP. It's MLP. Get one person to love what you're doing. Then get 10 people, then get 100. If you see that happening, that's when the fire's lit and something real is happening.
And being able to recognize those gates, right? To sort of say, okay, we have something here, right? What next?
Yeah.
The low-hanging fruit, or the person without a strategic mind would say, let's do more of that, or let's add more features. And then you become LinkedIn, right? Versus let's rethink how this thing can really scale. Pareto, throw a Pareto analysis on it and just to sort of see, okay, how do we really solve the problem in a way that we can't possibly sitting alone in this OpenAI sandbox? Yeah, because you're always going to hit that ceiling.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
It's I think, you're speaking to, having like the cross-functional teams. It's cliche to say get more voices in the room, but it's super important. You can't have just the data without some creativity. You can't have the product without engineering. Even bringing in engineers to help develop the product concept can change everything in terms of the speed to market and the viability of an idea. It's bringing people together and really having each side of the coin, each part of the puzzle, like interact and feed the other parts of the puzzle, which is crucial. So I want to ask you generally, Noble, just get into a few other things, like moving across the sort of the AI spectrum. What do you see happening right now from in the generative AI space culturally, tech-wise? Like, what are the things that excite you? What are the things that maybe give you pause for concern? Where's your mind at the moment?
It's a great question. I can sort of tackle this at different parts of the stack. What excites me are conversations about what if generative AI isn't the end all be all, right? What if generative AI isn't the path to what they're calling ASI or AGI in that sense, if that matters to you.
Yeah.
And I don't really care about AGI or any of that stuff because I don't even know what that means. I'm more interested in learning what comes next. As you alluded to in the beginning, I just want to understand what comes next. Another thing that really excites me along the lines of what's coming next is being able to interpret why the system predicted a thing. And I'm not talking about source attribution, which retrieval augmented generation and that kind of stuff addresses. I'm talking about mechanistic interpretability, some of the work that Anthropic has been pioneering on, OpenAI and Microsoft have been pioneering on. There was a time that, we went through these ebbs and flows with deep learning and machine learning where you'll find me on stage talking about no one wants to work with a black box model. Simplify the type of models that you want to use using some sort of regression model. If it's tree-based, it's easier to interpret and explain why, the feature importance is why that led to a prediction. And that's useful, not just to debug the model, but to also explain to legal why something went wrong, and also explain to the user why something went haywire, right? By just feeding that back into the system. And then adding complexity by, back in the old machine learning days, by basically having an ensemble of those that are all interpretable and obviously explainable to do that. So the world of mechanistic interpretability, Anthropic just released a paper where they're making a lot of progress. They have a version of their model that whose entire universe is the San Francisco Bridge. This is amazing stuff that I want to I'm very excited to learn about. So that's the exciting part. And then I also have some personal projects on what I'm calling explainable UI, right? Because I'm tired of chatbots, right? And what I'm trying to do is have either a plugin or a library, ideally, that can allow you to sort of intelligently guide the user through their workflow using an out-of-the-box model if you wanted, and then perhaps sell it someday with a RAG addition to that. That's exciting to me. What's not exciting is just the low-hanging fruit of a chatbot to solve the thing. So you probably have seen me rant and rave about why chatbots are a lazy interface.
Totally. And I love this conversation because I feel like that is almost sometimes the depth of creativity when it comes to a chatbot for this, a chatbot for that. Like, again, the value is huge. I think voice is going to finally be what it was promised a few years ago. Right? I think it really, really is. But like, we all can't interact with a system like that. It's just not. It's not efficient. It's suddenly effective, and it hasn't been for many years with Siri and Google Voice and Alexa. It's getting more effective in certain scenarios, but also we have other tools. We have screens. We have vision. We have other options for user experience that can be integrated with these systems that can get us to the results we need far, far faster. And that's the word we both live in, I think, a lot. It's like user experience. And even though accessibility to some of these features and functions within the AI world are now much more closer to many, it's still way, way far away for others that will go nowhere near OpenAI or try to, they need some direction. They need some buttons and prompts and, prompt in a different in different language, but you get what I'm saying.
The distinction I make, and the argument I've tried to make, and I'm still refining this theory, is that OpenAI, perhaps even Google or Meta, the reason why they have a chatbot is to showcase the latent space, the intelligence, lowercase I, of these systems.
Yeah.
By providing an API or a custom GPT to you and I, what I think we forget is that there's so much more that we can do to leverage the latent space of these systems. And so you mentioned, vision and audio, coupled, whether it's text to audio or text to speech or text to image, these multi-modalities in my explainable UI sort of mindset means, I'm filling out a DMV form, and it's seen enough of those types of forms, if it's trained on it, to be able to reduce the path to done. It's easy to think, well, that's a chatbot. No, well, it's not. Right? I'm filling out forms. That's enough typing. I do not want to have to go to ChatGPT, copy, and then paste my paragraph. It should, and you're starting to see that a lot, even for 2 years now, with copilots. GitHub Copilot is a great example of an explainable UI being able to sort of highlight a line of code or block of code, right-clicking and using that context menu to sort of provide additional inputs. That reduces the likelihood of me typing the wrong prompt, which reduces the model from misinterpreting what I need, which reduces hallucination. So that's my controversial statement. Number 2 is chatbots are the cause of hallucinations, in my opinion. There's a real cause if you 5Y or peel the onion on it. But the leading cause that I've seen is poor prompt writing. Yeah. And that's through a chat interface often. Remove that and constrain the IO. Totally.
Yeah. And that's what a GPT starts to do, I would argue. But and again, we've messed around with some, like one of the GPTs I created was a meeting debrief interview that would interview me. And with the new version of ChatGPT 4.0, it's really, the conversation is really, really good. So technically it's still a chatbot, but it actually interviews me to get to the bottom of what I want it to understand and provide to me. And it's like a conversation. Right. I see, the answer to that form, the DMV, or even like a doctor's office, we're still filling out these forms. Still.
Right.
To me, I see voice as the answer to that. I'm like and it could be in whatever language, doesn't matter. If we tying that PDF to a conversational assistant, in any language, can hope. And this is I think like that close. It's the challenges to making this a reality are more, the red tape and more the difficulty of sales and integration of the business needs and business system. But things have the promise of getting a lot easier, and we should be going that direction.
I agree with you. I think that idea that the GPT that you created, because going back to the emergent theme of this conversation, I think that could be a product, right? And the reason why I immediately think not a feature, perhaps a potential product, if you invest more into it, not so unsolicited feedback there, is that there are a myriad types of meetings, and one prompt or system instruction in the case of a GPT may not be able to cover all the bases in a way to get a high level of accuracy and satisfaction. However, a product that is a series of features will be able to sort of distinguish between a informational meeting with a decision meeting, an action meeting, or the different kinds of meetings, right? For different domains even. So say, for example, one trick that I use for meetings is, rather than just upload the transcript and get a blob of text back, is use the chain of thought sort of mindset to get what I want out of it. But I do that manually, and I tweak and tailor my prompt to it. So I'll give you, if I can remember it off the top of my head, I can give you in your audience like what I do with meetings, right? So if it's a decision meeting, I will list out in my prompt to first list out the key decisions, any follow-up items, any owners of it. If it's from Teams or Zoom, it appends the owners in the conversations and transcripts quite intelligently. And then I tell it to save that into a notepad, right? And then check the details in the notepad, check to see if the details of the notepad are factually consistent with the transcript. So for you, if it's a live meeting as a feature, you could just plug that into Zoom or whatever. Yeah, that is a Zoom story, but getting ahead of myself. But just, it's in the notepad, check to see if it's factually consistent. So it's going back to check against the transcript, and then finally synthesize the key points into a concise summary. What you get and what you and I may want is just a summary, but what I get is a lot more depth because it's a decision meeting, right? Now, take a different kind of meeting, you'd have to tweak and formulate that in a way to fit that need. Like we're talking about the career stuff. It's like it's, a debrief after a job interview for a hiring manager will slightly be different.
Yeah. I feel like that's what seems to be the case so far with any of the off-the-shelf meeting summarizers. Even some are very good at specific. I don't know if you're familiar with Spinach. Spinach is Scrum. It's for your daily stand-ups, so it'll summarize it really, really well for that context. But we don't use it anywhere else because it's not very good anywhere else. Now, whether Spinach starts distributing and allowing different types of meetings, or Zoom suddenly integrates the Spinach effect for everything else too, it's all happening. But this is the concern about building any products in this space is like, where's the moat? And basically the question is, who's going to swallow you up first? Is it OpenAI? Is it the Zoom of the world in this case, or who is it? I'd be very wary of having an AI tech solution startup at the moment, but I do think there's lots of startups in other industries that aren't tech that really need and will take advantage of some of this stuff. And that's where I see the opportunities that, I think people like you and I will be able to really help with.
One quick thing before we start wrapping up, you reminded me, I think at the beginning of this conversation, we talked about I'm a recovering startup founder, recovering from like a decade ago, as you are, right? And it was only recently that I realized a question that my LPs, when I went in trying to build something cool with my startup, I ended up a year raising money, which in hindsight, I regret. But they would ask, the LPs or VC, we didn't raise VC money, but like mostly angels would ask, is this a product or service or feature, along the lines of what we've been talking about? And I, the hubris in me would always say, no, it's a product, we're going to be around. But for the VC, they really wanted to know whether I was sort of thinking ahead. Because if I built a killer feature for Under Armour or Peloton, because I was in the fitness space, that was a viable business for me if I got traction, for me to eventually get an exit. And sometimes an exit is an acquisition, right? And that is a strategy. I mean, it sucks to sell a startup founder, build your startup for an acquisition, but you have to think, you have to scenario plan. Do game theory on it. What's the best that could happen if we fail? Well, we got acquired.
Yep.
Right. So what you said reminded me of that. Yeah.
Well, that's I think of this in my own business, my agency. It's like, it's a concept of building something to sell. If I build something which takes me out of it as much as possible, I will enjoy it more, being able to choose the things that I focus on every day. But by doing that, in essence, makes it more valuable to somebody else. So even though you're not building because you want to sell, if you build to sell with that mindset, I think it allows you to really enjoy your position within the business a lot more and give you time for creativity to expand it. Right. So super important to have that philosophy, I think.
Brilliant, spot on.
Well, Noble, I think we'll begin to wrap up. I really appreciate you joining me here. I do want to just ask if you want to let people know how to contact you or how to reach you in your world if they want to get in touch.
Yes. So I don't want to call myself an aspiring YouTuber. I don't know how that world works, but I am trying to grow my YouTube page. And so the first ask is find Noble Ackerson on YouTube and subscribe to the YouTube so that I can actually hit that magical 500 subscriber list. I'm only at like 10, including Paul here. And so definitely put a drop in that bucket for me.
Absolutely.
But the second call to action for folks that want to hear more from me is I've, for the last couple of months, been working on the Udacity AI product manager Nanodegree. And I'm very excited for it to launch next month in July 2024. And so if you are ever curious about the strategy, some of the stuff that Paul and I have talked about here today, the strategies that go into delivering robust, secure, privacy preserving or even unbiased models into your systems, definitely check out the refreshed AI product manager degree, AI product manager Nanodegree, mouthful, coming out next month. And I'm very excited to do more of that sort of giving back to community type things.
Very cool. Well, we have a couple of PMs starting here, plus my other folks who will get checking that out immediately. We'll include all these links down below. Noble, I'm going to wrap it up again. Thank you so much for joining me. It's so good to catch up with you again. We need to get together in person. Yes. But great to see you. Great to chat. I really enjoyed the conversation. And thanks everybody else for joining us on this episode of What's Happening podcast, or featuring GPT creators like Noble. Podcast is brought to you by 3Advance. We are the app development and AI development firm for startups. You can catch this podcast, the What's Happening podcast, on YouTube, on the usual places, Spotify, everything else. And of course, if you don't know about our newsletter, we have a What's Happening newsletter that's non-techie news for tech folks. So if you're a non-techie founder especially, or you want to keep in the know and you want to feel smart around people like Noble, check out our newsletter and subscribe to the podcast and the newsletter if you can. Thank you very much. That's it for today. We'll see you next week.